COVID-19 situation, and this is something that the full Board of Trustees had voted on in the May 2020 board meeting, that we could hold meetings virtually.
Sounds good. Yeah.
So we have really two main pieces of business and for this meeting. And one of the things that David had suggested was that instead of the full committee really tackling each of these issues, is that we divide up, we can discuss them during today's meeting, but that we divide up into subcommittees to then do the research and come back to the full committee with suggestions. And so the two things we're talking about are, one, basically an extra day of leave that would be flexible leave. Is that right, David?
Well, it's the proposal that the compensation committee made to the library board, which was that Jmrl adopt the city of Charlottesville's leave accrual.
Oh yes, the leave accrual. I apologize.
It's the rate of accrual, really. So what it does is, instead of waiting for 5 years of length of service for an employee to gain the next step, it gives half of that at halfway through the 5-year mark, and then again. And I can go. I've got that information if you want me to share it with the rest of the committee.
Sure. Why don't we start with that? And then also, just I want committee members to be thinking about like what interests them the most as to you know, what they would like to work on. Do you have those details, David, that you could share on the screen?
Sure. I've got, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm having all sorts of computer issues today. I've got everything except for the city's policy manual. That's not loading, and unfortunately that's what we need here. So let me show you the other things that the full board discussed, and then hopefully that will load in the meantime. It's a 200-page Word document, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay. While that loads, I'll show you what Jmrl's current accrual rate is. So we're talking about vacation leave only, and this also came up in the discussions with the full board about this, the fact that Jmrl separates vacation and sick leave. So there are 3 categories of leave at Jmrl. There's vacation leave, sick leave, and then 2 personal days, which staff are eligible for every year that don't roll over. Vacation rolls over to a certain amount, but there are caps on that. If you recall, the board voted last year to remove those caps for 1 year so that people could accrue leave during COVID that they haven't been able to spend. Those will be reinstated at the end of June this year. But basically, if you take a base 40-hour employee here, they begin by accruing 6.67 hours a month, and from 0 to 5 years. And then from 5 to 15, they accrue 10, and then 15 plus 13.33 hours. So the difference here with the cities is that they put some intermediary steps in. I apologize. Yeah, it's still loading. But effectively, they put a step in between the 0 to 5 years and 5 to 15 years at 3 years, where they accrue half of the amount that they would get at the 10, half of the difference there. And then they do that again they do it at 5 years and again at 15 years, I believe. So the full board talked about this. There were some concerns. I also reached out to our libraries across the state, our peer libraries, and every public library, in fact. And I heard from about 20 of those, and these wildly vary basically on when staff are eligible for more leave accrual. So the compensation committee thinking on this basically is that it's the end result is not much more for JMRL because we're getting to the same benchmarks. So at 5 years, a 40-hour employee would get to 10 hours. They would just accrue a little bit more in the 2.5 years in between.
And so when you say it doesn't, you're meaning it doesn't cost that much more.
Well, this is a question here, basically. Like there's no budget value cost to this. We do not have to ask for more money from the jurisdictions or for the state in order to make this happen. The costs here are in person hours, basically, in the amount of time that managers need to let employees away from the library, which means, conceivably they would have to bring more employees in order to cover during that time, or there would be staff shortages and extra work for the employees that were there. So this plan has been vetted by JMRL managers who like it and don't have a plan with it, but there is some concern amongst the board that this would be perhaps an undue burden and those kind of hidden costs wouldn't be truly sussed out.
And the only other question I had was, so there's no it's not also built into our risk management. So like when the auditors see this,
it is.
It is.
Yes.
I would imagine that this. Sorry, go ahead, David.
Oh, go ahead, Thomas.
I was just going to say, I imagine that this shows a fairly large increase on our liabilities in the audit because it's amortizing that 10-year accrual rate differently. And so with the accelerated accrual halfway through, we're increasing the liability on the audit.
Yes.
But like you say, not sort of functionally money out of pocket, because we're not expecting everybody to quit all at once and take all of their accrued hours as a cash out leave or anything like that.
It's an unfunded liability, exactly as Thomas just said. So it would count on the audit, and I can show you on last year's audit where that amount is. Of course, that number is going to be huge this year because of the uncapped year, because it's going to show a lot more leave on hand than we have most years, because most years there's a hard limit. So that's just an example of how that can fluctuate over time. Would you like to see that in the audit, Carla?
Sure. I guess what I really care about is ultimately, what does that mean in terms of the audit? Does it affect, I don't know, does it affect how our funders view us as a stable organization?
Yeah, that's an excellent question that likely we can't answer, but I don't believe that the amount would be as dramatic as maybe, the way that we just explained it and the way that Thomas just explained it. It's not, when staff get to 10 years, they're going to be at that amount anyway. Right. So it's only the ones that are in those intermediary years between 2.5 and 5, and then the next jump there.
Yeah, I don't think that sort of liability, I mean, same with pension liabilities, those things float there on the audits and aren't necessarily considered a huge knock against your actual financial position because they are so distant and seldom seen, as actually coming out of the pocket of the organization. I think the bigger thing to focus on here, like David said, is the burden that it adds to day-to-day management. And if we're hearing the endorsement from the branch managers of this, I think that speaks volumes to, what would be the biggest logistical problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Just for some reason, though, the board was really concerned about that.
Well, you can see the amount here. This is last year's
Yeah.
audit. We don't have the fiscal year 20 audit yet. So this is the compensated absences due in more than 1 year. So they kind of take the amount in 1 year, the 29,000, like this is this year's accounting.
Yeah.
And here's the future, and look at note 8. Where's Jerry when you need him? Here's note 1. Boy, note 1 is a big one too.
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
It doesn't actually explain anything about it. It just says what the difference is. So somebody could look here, Carla, and see if there's a major change.
Mhm.
We just, our government services committee here in Scottsville just sat down with our auditor to go over our annual audit, and this was something that they honed in on as well. You know, they had concerns about outstanding liabilities, long-term liabilities, things like that. And the advice that we got from our auditor was essentially not to concern yourself with things like the pension liability, because they are so distant and represent a liability that's never really expected to come out of your pocket anyway. But due to, you know, GADs and the good accounting practices and all of those, that, you know, it's important that they show all of these on your books.
Mhm.
I imagine that most of that advice would hold true for the nonprofit organization here with the library. And I think that, you know, seeing the compensated absences there, the biggest thing, you know, that is a little bit different in that it is A, as David explained, you know, time that we don't have people on staff, and B, a little bit of a payout liability when people carry that balance out when they leave, though I imagine, you know, our employee handbook put caps on how much that can be year to year.
Yes. And we follow the city's rules for leave payout.
Right. So, you know, if we're not increasing that, I don't think that we're actually, yeah, I don't see this as a big financial burden, though I'm sure it will show up right here on the audit as an increase in the next fiscal year.
Mhm.
And I don't think that was the board concern here, that it's going to show up in the audit. And you know, this is not anything that would result in a finding from the auditors. You know, it would just be a change in these numbers here. I think the concern was mostly about kind of the hidden costs, the unseen costs, and whether or not there's going to be detriment to service because of this. And I frankly, my belief is that if our managers can handle it, we can handle it, but we should make a sound organizational decision, not based on this group of managers, but the future as well.
Mhm.
I can stop screen sharing, I guess. You're just staring at numbers. So
I was one of the ones who had major concerns about the hours lost when we discussed this in the board. And I also, you know, we've given another holiday, which David, by the way, hasn't made it onto the calendar that comes up with the library's holiday schedule yet.
making a note.
Thank you. We've given another holiday. I'm trying to understand what problem we're solving with this because it really is increasing employees' compensation in the sense that they're having to work fewer hours for the same amount of money. And I don't see what problem we're solving by doing that. I know in prior years, we've sometimes had to worry about not being able to give raises because of the jurisdiction's decisions, and that may be true this year.
It was true last year, of course.
Yes. And I think that does become a problem as it goes forward if that continues to be an issue. We don't know yet, though. I know Nelson County, I believe, is going to be starting January 1 to give a 1% raise to their folks, so getting them back on a schedule for the last 6 months of this fiscal year. But it's nice to have some things in your back pocket if in fact you get pushed into a corner and can't give raises for a period of years. I don't know that we're losing staff because of these issues, that we're not able to recruit the best staff because of these issues. And I also don't know what the other jurisdictions do in terms of their leave policies for their employees, which is obviously potentially an issue if they were to look at the way we were dealing with this. So those are my concerns about this.
No, I think that that's reasonable. I would share your concern there that if we are, in the absence of being able to provide baseline raises, trying to leverage other avenues for staff compensation, when base wages do increase, we need to make sure that we haven't over-leveraged in such a way that there's a sort of snap to of overall compensation there in an unintended way. My concern about that overall in this particular regard, I think, is mitigated by the fact that we're not raising the overall level of accumulation, but just the rate of it. So yeah, I think on the whole, that's a very good thing to sort of be aware of and try to be mindful of. But I don't necessarily share the same concern in this particular instance.
Part of the issue, I think, is because of our unique relationship with the City of Charlottesville's HR. When staff go through their new employee orientation, they go through the City of Charlottesville's HR orientation. Now, it has been a while since Margaret or Krista or I have been through that orientation, but I know they go through what are our leave accrual rates, and then there's always a pause when they say, well, except for the library, you handle your own leave accrual and whatnot. So there are some places where we follow their guidelines and some where we do not. So in terms of the leave payout, we do follow the guidance that is in that manual that's still loading on my desktop here. But when it comes to the leave accrual, we are not following the cities there. So, and trying to get some history on when those changes were made, I'm talking with Donna Lee about it. I believe they were made, sometime mid to late 80s, and it was to solve some sort of problem with too much vacation being carried over. And maybe at that point, the library wasn't following those kind of hard limits on what can carry over every year or what gets paid out upon employee resignation or termination. I think that the thinking from the managers and the compensation committee here was just as a retention tool. Not necessarily as here's additional compensation or here's going to make up for a lack of a raise. I don't think any staff would consider this to be, in the same ballpark. Although I hear what Marcy's saying, I don't think that the thinking was that, oh, we didn't get a raise last year, so this will make up for that. For the bulk of our employees, it's not going to make much of a difference. But I know that the board was interested in this group doing some homework on this that hasn't happened yet. So what I was going to propose is that we get a small subset here to go pull those numbers from our local jurisdictions, figure out what all 5 accrual rates are. In looking at the libraries across the state, we're in pretty good shape for what we offer in terms of leave, both offering medical leave and vacation leave and 2 personal days. We are not lagging behind. We're not at the top, but we're not at the bottom. So I was hoping to get some volunteers to put together a working group. This probably could happen via email, just collecting some information, sharing it out with this group before taking it back to the full board. Because clearly there are some things to talk about before the full board discusses again.
Because I think we probably are behind our localities. I
don't know.
Yeah, I think just at least based on the city and the county. How about that?
The county does 1 day per month for each month employed during the first 5 years of continuous employment. So that gives you up to, no, please don't make me do math on the fly. 1 day per month for each month during the first 5 years. So that's 12 a year. 12 times 5 is 60 days. Is that right? And that is total leave. So our employees.
That's annual leave.
That's annual leave, right. So does that include sick leave, Carla?
Does not include sick leave.
And we already looked at UVA, and their deal was that they don't separate it out. Because I talked to Keith at UVA at the libraries, and they didn't distinguish between sick leave and vacation leave.
But I think it is normal for places to distinguish it out, at least at the government level. It still seems to be normal that you have sick leave and you have annual leave.
I mean, that's a bigger question that maybe we should be addressing at some point, because it comes up, and it's come up quite a bit this year, you know, the difference between vacation leave and sick leave this fiscal year. You know, what the advantages are to doing that the way that we're doing it, and whether or not it is more advantageous just to say, here's a pool. There are a couple things about leave that I'm interested in. I think the biggest one is trying to figure out a way down the road to offer some sort of shared leave bank, which some of these organizations do, which would be, instead of, you know, it would be being able to lend your leave to somebody or give your leave to somebody else. We've had requests for that. A few of our organizations do that, and it would be a way to kind of use some of the leave that's being lost, which would bring down the total liability number for the auditors. And also we have staff annually who are losing leave. So Carla, what do you think about getting a group together to kind of draw all this information into one cohesive document to share? Is that a waste of time? Should we just move forward here?
No, I think it would be important. I think it would be helpful to see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to help.
Some of that. Great. Thomas, did you say you'd be interested?
Yeah, I'd be happy to help.
We've got, Marcy collected some information and I collected some information. So we're not starting from zero.
So you're talking about Greene, Louisa, Nelson, Albemarle, Charlottesville. We have Charlottesville, we have Albemarle, we have UVA's, which is not really relevant. So it's really just Greene and Louisa that we need?
And Nelson. I think
Why is UVA's not relevant?
Well, because they bunch it all together, and we're not talking about doing that right now. They just have leave.
Oh, I understand that, but if you look at the total leave that they get, it's very much less than what either the county or the city gives.
Or Jmrl.
With very generous sick leave for the library and the county and the city.
Yeah, and I wonder if UVA is different, I guess, between the person that I spoke to, for instance, was in the academic library side of it. I don't know, you know, the hospital's probably different versus, you know, depending on where you're at UVA.
Not really. They revamped their staff classification system about 15 years ago, and that's when this combined leave policy came into play. Okay. And it's pretty much throughout the organization. It's pretty uniform. Not for faculty and not for senior administrative staff, but for the rest of the classified staff.
Yeah, he said there's, administrative and professional faculty, it's fuzzier. And then faculty, yes, there's all those different.
Exactly, but the classified staff, which is what's most relevant, I think, to the library staff, is all treated the same throughout the organization.
Okay.
I had to deal with that because of grant funding and all that kind of stuff. So I know that system pretty well.
I think it would be useful to include them just as, you know, the largest employer in the area, just as a basis for comparison, understanding that they're not a governmental or, you know, they're not a local jurisdiction, but it'd be useful to see what it is. I find my computer finally loaded this screen, so I just have to share it because it worked so hard to get us here. So I'm going to share screen real quick. And I shared this with the full board. 40 hours, it's a little confusing, and also they skipped some steps here. Oh, this is sick hours. So accrual and accumulation. Any employee in a regular position with the city with at least 1 month of service is eligible to get sick leave. So here's sick leave. Where's the? Sheesh. Never mind. I'll email it out to this small group. That manual is 25 years old and is showing its age as well. All right, so I heard Thomas, I hear me, Margaret or Krista, either one of you interested in hopping on a subcommittee here?
Are we also looking at the milestones? Because like UVA, I do see less than 3 years. I see 3 to 6, 7 to 9, 10 to 19, and 20 plus. So there's also, again, the difference in milestones. And I do feel like when we're talking about, the only milestone we're talking about changing is under 5. Everything
Yeah.
else stays the same.
I think that's kind of the crux of the conversation here is, where are those inflection points where the accumulation rate changes? And
There were 2, right, Krista?
Wasn't it for the city, was it just between 1 and 5 and 5 and 10, or was it just between 1 and 5?
So the library does between 5 and 15, right?
Right.
And the city does 5 to 10 and 10 to 15. So there was a second inflection point there.
Yeah, I think there were 2 total.
David, I'm happy to do if you want me to be on a committee, I'm happy to do anything you need me to do.
All right, that's the spirit. Okay, so sounds like maybe Thomas and Margaret and I will start sharing around some information about this, try to get it all in one cohesive document that we can share with this group. Maybe we can meet one more time about this and then bring it to the full board.
And if you guys don't mind, can you also poll about leave banks and see who of these localities use leave banks, and if they only use them for sick? Or so I think the questions are, do the localities keep sick and annual separate? What is the accrual rate, and when are those milestones?
Okay.
And then do they use a shared bank? And I'm guessing it's just for sick leave.
UVA has a whole list of stuff here, but they have a university leave sick bank. They have bone marrow organ donor. I mean, they have all sorts of, but the bank is a university leave sick bank.
Because maybe this is something that we could add to this discussion that would kind of solve a couple of problems or perceived problems, right? That we're taking on some sort of greater liability or that sort of thing. But yeah, I would just be interested to see like who has leave banks.
And the other thing that I can do, which I did for the board, is to pull up, what this change would mean. It's a snapshot, but what it would mean right now for Jmrl.
Right. How many employees does this really affect?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a pretty small number, probably, but it's a snapshot, like you said.
I'm looking for that because I had at some point I did do that, but it's more than a week ago. Oh wait, here we go. So currently, this is as of the board meeting in November. There are 24 employees that would be in between the 3 and 5 years of service, and 13 in between the 2 and 15. Okay, so that's a big chunk. 24 and 13. So it would mean a lot more leave for those folks. Okay, great. So we'll work on that and bring it back to this group.
So the other thing that we really need to discuss is getting basically base pay to the minimum wage and eventually to that $15 living wage mark, and what that would look like. And so I would be happy to serve on a subcommittee that would be looking at that timeline.
Carla?
Yeah.
So just the other day, I don't know if you saw this, but part of the incoming president's COVID relief, the 1.9 trillion, is a $15 federal minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
So that likely we won't know the outcome of for a while, but that might rapidly accelerate any discussions that we're having should that change on a federal level. Because right now the federal minimum wage is $7.25. I don't think it would be possible that there's a switch that gets flipped. It would probably be something similar to what Virginia did, like roll it.
It's a tier, yeah.
But that might provide, right now we're working under the states, which, as we know, $11 for next January, and then $12.50 for the year after that. Those are the two benchmarks we know of, but 15 is the state's ultimate goal, and it's the president's goal as well. So whatever we do, better have those timelines, or as close as we can figure out what those timelines are, in place. Do you want to look at the current pay scale?
Sure.
So if you recall, the change that's happening already is to compress. This is band 1 and stage 1 of the pay scale. Stage 2. The minimum for stage 1 there is $10.40. The minimum for stage 2 is $11.64. And I think we have about 10 employees, most of whom are shelvers, that are in this band 1, stage 1. And the immediate change is going to be to compress these two together and to make some slight tweaks to especially the shelving position, to give them more cross-training and the opportunity to work in other areas of the library. I know Margaret's probably very interested in that as a supervisor of shelvers. So that will raise the low level there to meet next January's obligation, which is the one under the current budget year that we're working on now. So the library and the library board has talked about this because it's part of next year's budgeting. The following year's budgeting is going to mean everybody that's in the lowest level of the stage 2, which is a large amount of our employees. It's frontline staff, branch support, circ support staff. Those that have been here for a while are over that $12.50 mark, but those that are starting new in the past few years have started at $11.64 and will have to come up. I was looking at something the other day, and it was like almost every employee in Louisa is below the $15 mark for sure, but that $12.51, I think half of them are. So we're going to have a plan to bring within the next couple budget years to our jurisdictions, and they're going to understand because they're going to be under the same mandates. But we really have to, and part of this is just the work that we do every year to show them the value of their dollars that are spent. I just fear that some jurisdictions might come back and say, well, the solution here is less staff.
Yeah, go ahead and close the door. Sorry, you guys.
Okay.
The other thing that is going to bring about, though, is another compression crisis.
Yes.
Isn't it? By a year from January.
Yeah, you can see, I'll share that one more time, because the folks that are in the, like the stage 3 specialists, which is the big distinction here, is you can have some responsibility for the building. So if a manager's not there, you can be in charge of the building, and then also you can offer programming. The low starting salary there is $15.36. So we're asking more responsibility from that category, and if we just bring everybody to 15, then they're going to be just barely above that, hence the compression issue. So I know last year, Thomas, when we talked to Albemarle County, their plan to get to $15 this year included a plan to address compression, and it seemed like a magic trick when they were discussing it. But that all fell by the wayside with COVID there. But I think that's the place to start, to try and suss out from them like how they were planning. We used their algorithms to get our compression under control, and it worked very well over 3 years. I think we also need to be looking at their algorithms to bring everybody to 15 over a period of time without causing quite the compression issue. The 15, I mean, Marcy, we might just be we might be saddled with that just because of the enormous costs that we're going to be talking about. And this is a very positive thing. This is a much needed thing. It's just, it's not cheap.
No, better really put a push on that cross training and let people have more responsibility.
Yeah. Well, luckily we hire, even at the lower end of our pay scale, the folks that are interested in working at Jmrl are very skilled and enthusiastic.
Absolutely.
Um,
They ought to.
So what I'm interested in doing for this subcommittee is to try to set up a meeting with the folks at the county to maybe we could loop Zach.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Zach came up with, he had all the, calculations for the last round.
Yeah, and he built it into the portal. Zach, are you volunteering?
Sure.
I understand, and that we are under some time limitations with Zach. His expiration date is nearing.
Yeah,
I
but
would
you
be-
have
I
my
would-
full services until then.
That
Good.
sounds much worse than it meant, but Zach is going to likely be leaving the area, leaving the state, I believe, this summer. So work that we need him for, we got to squeeze out of him now.
And we need some overlap so that someone else knows what it is, that he came up with, or that what he's doing. I would be interested in this just because of the overlap with the compensation committee and the bands and stages and all of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Sounds like Carla, myself, Zach, and Krista for this one. And the first step would be to reach out to the county and share with them some information and see if they'd be willing to sit down and talk to us about how they had been planning on making this change, what it would mean to the change of their evaluation system, like their core competencies and things. Because likely, and for a long time, we've been looking at our comp system saying, geez, this isn't really, it's not the best tool. When did we get it, Krista? You told the board this.
I want to say 18 years ago, something like that.
Yeah. And it was the cities, we moved in lockstep with the city of Charlottesville.
But they don't use it anymore. They do something else. And
Diverged, yeah.
So I do think that one of the things the county did with the recent, tackling compression was they did look at every job description. And they looked at core skills that kind of like marked it as, a certain level. So I know we were looking at job descriptions, but is that something we need to do at this point to help with the salary range?
Potentially. I mean, that's an ongoing issue. It's kind of a backburnered problem that needs to be addressed. But a lot of our job descriptions, there's some discrepancy between what the city has on file and what we have on file.
I see.
We run into issues with getting things classified correctly. When we need to get a job posted, of course, it has to go through the hoops of city HR. And sometimes what gets spit out the other end isn't exactly what we might have started with. So there's work to be done there. And I had started discussing a project with an interim HR director 2 years ago, who's no longer with that department or organization. So it's been a bit, we could handle the in-house end. It's the city end that's going to be a bit more difficult to fix up. But yeah, I agree with you. That's likely how they did it, right? They looked at every single position. And we're doing that, kind of for those bottom, the band 1, stage 1, we're going to have to update those and update the competencies associated. But likely they all need to be looked at. So I really think, well, this subcommittee can talk about it, but we're going to have to come up with at least 2 plans. One is just okay, what's the minimum dollar amount we're going to need in order to meet our legal obligations here? And the second one's going to be, what's the best way to do this without breaking our pay scale because of compression issues in the next few years? And the third one might be, well, what's a better system altogether?
Even if in-house we were to look at okay, these are the job descriptions that are currently at this lower level. Okay, what are the skill sets that they all are being asked to do? And then, what makes the jump to a higher level? And, should that person be at higher than 1536 or whatever the base is right now?
I mean, effectively, if we were to use our current pay scale and compensation plan to get to $15, if that comes down from the federal government saying in 2 years everybody needs to be at $15, that would make every employee a specialist. And it's easy enough hiring going forward to say every employee is going to take some responsibility for the physical plant for the building.
Mhm.
Every employee is given authorization to make decisions that would affect the building and the people who come in. Every employee could do programming. Hiring moving forward, I don't think that's an issue. It's the folks that have been doing a job for many years that all of a sudden you're coming back to and saying, well, now this is part of your job. It's not a bad thing, again, because it's going to come with the compensation for that. It's just a big thing.
Is, but I can tell you just my personal experience, like with the visitor center, what happened is they didn't do the second half of it. So everybody who was hired on in the beginning, and this is when it was under the city, they were hired on at a different pay rate, but a higher expectation of skills.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting? And then instead of bringing the existing folks up to the skill set, you just had these two teams kind of working at the same time in supposedly the same job, but being paid a different pay rate and having different job expectation, different job responsibility.
Yeah, I remember a similar situation at Jmrl years ago when I first started working at a branch. There were two children's specialists, and somebody was hired who had a library degree. So that position was made a children's librarian position, which comes with more responsibility and more money, but they had kind of started at the same level there. One of them had been working there for many, many years. The other one was relatively new, and the jobs weren't really that. There was no differentiation saying that this job is this and this job is this. So it's similar to what you're discussing, and that's the kind of thing that we would want to try to avoid.
Right.
I guess, right, my main fear is about the funding of it. How we're gonna work this out in the next few years. And I think it would be great to have a timeline from one or the other, either the state or the feds, because we can work with the 1250 goal of a year, 2 years from now, basically. But if that's not going to be enough, then if it's more dramatic, then we need to move quicker.
Right. If the timeline is something like 11, 1250, 1350, 15, right? Like then that's probably doable.
Yeah.
Over 3.5 years or so, or 3 years.
The quicker we can get there, the better, because this has been something that's been in our 5-year plan. The staff have been asking for. Of course, we look at the university and the city both paying $15. By the time we get to 15, that metric will have moved. It's going to be 18 or 20. So I'd rather not be constantly behind the 8 ball on it.
Okay, well, so what I'll do is next week, I'll just report to the whole board that we are doing some research on these two major problems. We broke it up into subcommittees, and do you think we can have info by the February board meeting?
Potentially. I mean, this group would have to meet again to review, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's see, can we just see how quickly these two subcommittees can get things going?
Sure.
I would think so. We've got some other work going on in other committees. So, and we also need to get the 5-year plan committee together again. So potentially.
Okay.
And talking about compensation in general, there is I'm interested in how other regional libraries do this. Some of them kind of have each jurisdiction pay their own salary scale, basically, which is we don't have the HR department for that. It's just basically Donnelly and half of Zach. But I know, this is a chance too to think creatively about how we can use these. I know Zach's floated the idea of kind of regional employees that would kind of go around to different branches instead of being housed at one particular branch. And obviously we can only do so much of that, but this may be a chance to look around again at some of our peer libraries to see if there are ideas that we could steal, because we're trying to get a position in Nelson County. We've been trying to do that for a few years. If there are kind of other things that we could look at to give them some coverage help in the meantime, like having an employee that wasn't, because right now, if the Nelson County staff is paid for by Nelson County, and so if we sent somebody who worked at Northside to work there, which we do all the time, you know, really it's Albemarle paying for the Nelson County service, which is not how it's written in our regional agreement. So at any rate, just throwing that out there is something that we can be thinking about when we're looking around. You know, not to say it would be that easy to change the way that we do some of those things, but it's at least worth figuring out, well, what are the other solutions that are out there?
You're thinking about staff people who would be funded by multiple localities?
Yeah, like myself, I mean, I'm funded by all 5 localities.
Sure.
And they pay a percentage of my salary based on circulation. So having a few employees like that, you know, if we had to, so say the $15 needs to come next year at this time, and we go back to a locality and they say, we cannot afford the cost that that's going to be. So instead of doing that, do we maybe remove some hours from an employee there, or you know, not to terminate anybody or anything like that, but like if somebody was leaving, can we take some of those hours or take some of the sub hours and turn them into a regional cost so that that branch, that jurisdiction would be paying a portion of it instead of the entirety, but then that job gets shared around? Just, you know, let's look at it with fresh eyes.
Okay, tell me again who's going to help Thomas.
Myself and Margaret.
Great.
That brings up the question of whether or not we need to add somebody to this committee, because I believe we lost a staff member. Was it Gail?
I believe it was Gail Ott, because it was Gail and Margaret, yeah.
So we're down.
I'm not officially on this committee, but
there you are.
the compensation.
You got muted in the middle.
I think because of the compensation committee overlap, there's a, you know, good for me to be here, but I think it would be good to have a regular staff, you know, input.
Do you want to open that up to the staff, or?
Yeah, are there any objections to doing that? Because Zach is not an official member either. He's been put in. Okay, great.
But any staff can attend the meetings.
Sure, yeah.
You know.
It's easier these days than ever before. Okay.
Should we set a kind of a time frame as to when we'd like to regroup?
Let me pull up a calendar. Do you want to set a meeting for before the February board meeting and see we can either host it, or if the subcommittees haven't made enough headway, we can postpone?
What about the 16th?
It works for me.
Yeah, similar to today, it would be after a holiday, but that's works. It works okay.
It's actually Mardi Gras.
It is a holiday.
It is a holiday.
I'm sorry, I'm just getting my calendar up here. What was that, March?
No, February 16th?
February, I'm sorry, yes. That works fine for me.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Is afternoon better for everyone?
Yeah, this same time? Is that what you're saying?
2 o'clock.
Yeah, that works fine for me.
Works fine.
And what I'll do, Carla, is get some information together for both of the subcommittees and email that out to those groups so that there's a starting point for each of them. On the accrual side, it's basically gathering the information that Marcy and I gathered before the board meeting in October. And then on the compensation side, it'll be reaching out to the county to see who our best contact is there and whether or not we could schedule a time to pick their brains.
Okay. That sounds great. One thing that came up with our meeting with the city was that there was a mention that there might be funding to help with a compensation study. But David, I just don't think the city's in any sort of shape.
I'm waiting to hear back from them based on a series of questions that Marcy had last week about the money that they mentioned. So they're going to be doing a compensation study at some point, and they had mentioned that it might be possible for us to become a part of that. We didn't get into any specifics about what kind of costs that would entail and whether or not they would include us as part of staff, or that would be something Jmrl would have to pay into. So I have not heard back on that, and I've got some questions out to them too about the funding that they mentioned, Carla, coming back as part of the forfeiture from the retirement plan. You know, there was pretty, there wasn't a lot of information available at that time, so I'm waiting to get some more back on that as well, and I'll report to the full board as soon as I hear back on either one of those.
But would that be money that we could set aside to fund something like this?
Potentially, you know, my hope had been that that would be money that would go into the fiscal year 22 budget in order to help pay for staff raises. It looks unlikely that that's the case. It looks like the city wants to be done with this right now. And if that's the case, then that's extra money in this fiscal year, which the board can talk about the best ways to spend. And if that's something we're interested in, you know, that is like an RFP and a whole thing. So we're believe it or not, we're running out of time on this fiscal year, even though it doesn't seem like it. That can be a months-long process.
And you just have no idea like how much money they're talking about?
I don't know. I can reach back out to Chrissy and see if she has any idea if they've made any marks on that. And I know that from what I read in the press last week, one of the mandates for the new city manager is to hire these leadership positions. So I'm hoping that HR will be at the top of the list there.
Great. Well, everyone, thank you for your time. David, thank you for your leadership. And does anyone have any other questions?
No, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you all. So I'll see the board members next week.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Zach.
Take care, everyone.